To me, it's just a big sale. But there are people who believe, George Galloway, I suspect, are people who believe that John Lennon really died. And the way they sort of string the story along comes from the mind of Patricia Fripp, an obsessed individual hitchhiked from Pittsburgh to St. Louis to stalk her brother and was obsessing over a Jewish girl when he could have saved John Lennon. That's their storyline. Um, it's very interesting that they had it illustrated before John Lennon presumably died on their record covers. In other words, a story that they swedged to my persona, as they put it. But there's clearly people who believe that. This Arnold Schwarzenegger Hollywood production, this tag team who kidnapped and tortured me and maliciously promoted this as an alter ego, a ghost in the machine, an enemy within. And that Louis Lapham said I was to blame for not knowing anything about it. How do you get out of that? You really can't. And Cyril Wecht had created a nerve agent, a spectrochemical lab over in Wilkinsburg that he was using to apply the persona's mission statement. You know, the group in the album So. They were saying, so what this happened? So what? The John Lennon is important. The AIDS victims are not. And for punishment for trying to get after what happened, they keep poisoning me. And they have a really demented person who is psychopathically inclined to torture me to death. And that's the source of the whole thing. Yoko Ono is the source of the whole thing. It's a World War II revenge. So, out of respect for the people who think that John Lennon really died, um, I'll address this storyline. Now, there is research that establishes that John Lennon was behind it, that he was the man behind the curtain, that he staged his death. He pulled a Houdini. I mean, it's established. I can show that. But out of respect for people who do not believe that, I'll explain. I can't really explain, but I'll describe the circumstances surrounding what happened in Pennsylvania with John Hines, which was a configuration in the war game and the death of Princess Diana. Nelson Harrison believes that Charles locked up the landing gear on Hines' planes. I think is what he told me, but he may not believe that anymore. He may know. It's idle speculation. It's not holy writ to consider these things, but there are people who go on benders about it. They're dangerous and sickening people who need to be stopped. But I'll show you how it operated. There are certain things I do know. I do know that Will Zellbrun, who ran the operation on Mount Desert Island, that Princess Diana's favorite, Penis Gabriel, wrote an alibi for, based on Patricia Fripp's claim that I was obsessing over Leslie, had prior knowledge of the AIDS attack. And I set myself up to try to get information about it and evidence about it, and I succeeded. I produced sufficient evidence to convict, necessary and sufficient evidence to convict. But the people in Pittsburgh, as the psychiatrist who ran me out of town, basically, with lies about how I was not tortured as a child, they claimed. just disregarded the evidence. And then John Hines mysteriously died. And Ray Geiger and I were talking about it, and he said, "Why do you think they did that?" Because I made clear that I thought that a group calling themselves Plague Mass was behind it, Diamond Gaullus. And I guess I just thought that the crowd behind AIDS came from Pennsylvania, so they lashed out. But what I didn't know at the time was that Diamond Gaullus was behind AIDS. She was setting up this Beatles story with the help of the people who released AIDS, claiming that they represented the victims, a holding company for the victims who released AIDS. And it's spiritual warfare, it's holy war. And the tentacles of that crowd are very widespread. Foucault met with the Ayatollah. Putin and the KGB were in on it, evidently. And they want to build an artificial intelligence nexus that eliminates anybody who's not chaste. Toon wants to, as John Lennon said, the young and healthy to march down the aisles of his beauty pageants, international beauty pageants. Of course, what we need is water. And that's what I was not looking for this sort of Amanda Harcourtian tune fest. I was talking about Mr. Fuller, about the world's need for clean water supply. I suggested an international pipeline instead of nuclear bombs to somebody who was in plastics industry from Hancock and Bowling Green. And ecology. And I said, with new technologies, a lot of African nations will have their independence. They'll be self-sufficient and capable of negotiating their own agency. And I was talking about this in the Pit News all the time, and going out on benders and discussing it with people who were in the Peace Corps. And slowly but surely meeting people like Linus Pauling. I met Linus Pauling, Derek Parfit. And Geiger used to sort of laugh about the way he brought out my personality. He called it playing the Irish fiddle, I guess. But it was in that context that I said that I believed that Hines may have been killed as a statement from Plague Mass. I don't believe that anymore at all. What I think happened was that people in Pennsylvania, some of whom may have gotten the word that the person who they knew as a deaf kid who got pushed around a lot had somehow become a temper tantrum item of British rock stars because of something about John Lennon, and been very weirded out by that. It's hard to know how many Pennsylvanians in the Union knew. They may have almost all known. But it's possible that somebody got word about it and was weirded out about it. It was a big gang up. And it was John Lennon and Yoko who thought of it. Pardon me, I'm trying to address people who don't believe that. But I felt what happened was that there was some eerie awareness that my being on Mount Desert Island, Jeremy Shell Hayes was very taken aback, I guess is how you put it, when he heard that I was on Mount Desert Island when the Jackson Labs burned down. The fact that I was on Mount Desert Island and all the other things that have been going on may have made some people alert to what that meant. And since Panis had written the alibi for it, he called it an experience park. He talked to technologists and artists with the experience park in mind. In other words, they were going to contaminate everybody. They were going to experience park everybody. He's a psychopath. They needed to change the subject, doubled it quick. So they knocked out Hans so people would go, and we don't care about queer ball. We don't want to hear a sad story. I think that's how it actually operated because Diamond DeGaulle was seen outside the World Trade Centers holding a stiletto, and Chris Robertson went in an airplane above the World Trade Centers to watch. So we know who they are. Daya, she goes by. The woman by the name of Daya called me to tell me she used to, showed up at St. Peace rallies of Iraq that Lou Carl did. Her mother showed up, I mean. Mother told me in war only the art matters. These dacoits, are after the art. Give me good, the goblins. Give us good. Ours, goblins. Pay me for my work and injuries. It's a ridiculous thing to do to somebody. It's absurd. And they go around knifing bystanders and stuff. Seattle is really Turkey. It's really psychotic. And if they had dealt fairly and honestly with me, if they had not been the people who were behind the attack, if they had been taken by surprise and come to me and said, "What's going on?" I would have been able to help create an international legacy of timely warning and intervention. But they were all, and the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. How do you explain how Endor angled directly at the neuroplasm when I didn't know it was even there? How do you explain that he added that into seizures? If he didn't know, if they weren't in on it. I think you can't. I think you have to reach the conclusion that the rabbits of Nottingham were behind it. And that's one of the conclusions I've reached about Lenin Sudini. And they just chuckled and said, "We'll tell them a cautionary tale," is how Louis Lapham puts it. And the way out is to get a hold of this stuff because it's stupid to listen to people like that. And Biden, he says, "Oh, somebody may have a point about what's going on in Palestine. We're supposed to help them." Then he gives them the most brutal, driven to evil ogres currently operating alive. Billions of dollars in bombs. And stupid people go over and sign them. They're dropping them. I don't think it's reasonable to expect such loudish people to be able to sort any of this out. What you're going to have instead is people like Nigel going, "Well, queer ball's convenient thing to hate." That's how Thoughts Gordon, who reminds me a good deal of Norm Finkelstein, put it. Queer ball is a convenient thing to hate.